Hi, my name is Fareed Bakari, and I lead product marketing for HP's security research organization. And the reason we're getting together today is to talk about the vulnerability dubbed Shellshock, which was disclosed last week. And Shellshock affects the Unix-based born-again shell, or bash. And bash is a utility or a command interpreter that's found on the vast majority of Unix and Linux systems out there. So in this Hangout, we want to understand a little bit more about this vulnerability, how it's affecting customers, really what the impact is and the severity. We want to give a sense of what we've been seeing in our research teams, our internal research teams, as well as with communications we've had with external researchers. And we also want to make sure we let you know what HP has been doing from a product update perspective to help our customers. And to that end, we've assembled some great experts here from HP Security Research and DB Labs, and I'm going to give them a quick second just to introduce themselves. Let's start with Brian Gorentz.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm the research inside of HP Security Research Organization. My primary responsibility is running the Zero Day Initiative, which is the world's largest vendor-agnostic bug bounty program.
And let's move on to Daniel.
So my name is Daniel Miesler. I'm a practice principal with Fortify and Demand, and I lead the research and development group within that organization.
And Joe.
Hi, my name is Joe Seckman. I'm the director of the software security research team here at HP, and we work on providing security intelligence that powers products across the HP enterprise security products portfolio.
And then finally, Steve.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Steve Pavolny. I manage the Austin, Texas and Prague, Czech Republic based teams of Tipping Point security researchers and filter development. And you might know us by the DB Labs and the digital vaccine, which we ship to our customers every week. Thanks for joining us.
Perfect. All right, thanks a lot. So, let's get started with Brian. So, in your capacity leading the vulnerability research team here at HP, as well as the Zero Day Initiative. I know you guys were involved in the very early hours after this disclosure. So, can you give us some more insight on the bash vulnerability, how it works?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'll kind of go over the bug, but I kind of want to start. I'll be using the term Shellshock. That's kind of the name that's being used for the bug itself. And it really highlights another interesting critical vulnerability in technology that we rely on every day just to operate. The bug itself actually lies in functionality that evaluates specially formatted environment variables passed in bash from another environment. The bash itself actually uses environment variables named by a function name and a function definition, using a variable value to propagate function definitions through their environment. The vulnerability itself occurs because bash does not stop processing these function definition after it finishes processing the function definitions, and it continues to parse and execute shell commands following those function definitions. As a result, an attacker can actually gain code execution on a vulnerable process. Applications that are vulnerable to this issue if they allow user-supplied data in environment variables, which will later get processed by bash. And I think one of the interesting things about this bug is not only is it easy to exploit because it is just straight OS command injection to bash, but also there's lots of different vectors that are available to attackers to gain code execution. And that's probably one of the most fascinating things for researchers, along with people who are being protected by Tipping Point. There's some of the vectors that have been known today are HTTP requests to CGI scripts. You can be command injection can occur via SSH, via the force command functionality, and DHCP clients that are using environment variables that are passed in by malicious DHCP servers. Beyond that, just because the actual command execution is going on using bash, it's very easy to actually get reverse shells using this vulnerability, stealing password files and stealing other sensitive information, along with dumping malware on the system itself. after the discovery of this vulnerability and patch of this vulnerability, several researchers started to look at Bash with new eyes, like they did with Heartbleed. And right now we know of two issues that have been discovered since then: CVE 2014-7169 and CVE 2014-6277. The first one actually being another variant of command injection using Bash, and the second being a memory corruption issue that's not patched yet. It kind of offers an interesting insight into how researchers and possible attackers can take an existing disclosure in a piece of software and start looking for variants to gain code execution on boxes.
Yeah, so Brian, yeah, it definitely sounds like a pretty broad attack surface, as you mentioned. And I was just wondering, with other folks in the group here, obviously there's been a ton of conversations on social media, and security researchers have been blogging about this. What makes Shellshock different? Why is there such a concern here? Yeah, so let's kind of open it up there.
I think one of the interesting things is kind of what I pointed out is there's numerous vectors that are available to attackers to actually hit this vulnerability itself. I mean, Bash is a core piece of technology that we've been relying on for decades to actually handle all sorts of functionality for us, and just the fact that you can get code execution using the same bug in HTTP requests to CGI scripts, but also get code execution on DHCP clients is just really interesting, and offers attackers basically a multitude of options to get code execution on your box.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think the issue is that for decades people have been building these applications that have this Bash processing functionality in there, and now it's just a matter of saying, okay, well, this has been going on for multiple decades. Where are they? Are they internally facing? Are they internet facing? And all that accumulated sort of attack surface area is there for the taking.
Yeah, definitely. I think Daniel nailed it there. I was going to point out there's a few things that are really interesting to me, and I think what make it interesting to the field, not just the security intelligence community, but my wife's a pediatric nurse, and she knew what Bash was within 2 days, and not just because I talk about it all the time, but just because everyone has a general awareness. So one is what Daniel was talking about, which is this bug has been around for some 2 decades or more, 20 years, in the way that Bash was built. So that's one thing. It's ubiquitous. It's deployed, all over the place. It's accessible, via a number of different protocols, and that's very interesting. And to me, the most important thing is that it's so trivial to exploit, and pretty much anyone, even without a really low-level technical knowledge, can look at how these exploits are sent and formatted and be able to easily see why they're successful without a lot of work, right? If you have a standard, a heap or stack-based buffer overflow, today those have gotten so complex to exploit and so many mitigations. But with this bug in particular, it's literally can be as simple as 15, 20 characters, and you can have remote control of a system. So I think the ease of exploitation, the time that the bug has been present, and then just the general number of protocols or variants of ways that this can be exploited make it really relevant to the field.
Right, and I think, Steve, you talked about this a little bit, but there are a lot of vulnerable environments out there that use some version of Bash, and many of those could be not only just operating systems, but embedded devices, for example, that are hard to patch, may not be able to patch. So, again, that's it's quite a diverse group of systems that we'd be looking at here.
Yeah, and not only is it difficult to patch at that scale, but even in this case, and I think we may talk about this a little bit more, the patch failed or opened up a new bug, which within hours of the release of the initial Shellshock, we internally have called it aftershock. I'm not sure if that's a public term yet, but we saw another bug exposed through a quick patch, and so and Brian, I think, is going to spend some more time in a bit here talking about other bugs that have been exposed and the way the research community jumps on the bandwagon and starts to look at these. So, not just the fact that it's so hard to patch globally, but the fact that when you rush patches out or are not careful with that, we actually see new bugs introduced.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting that researchers, once an advisory comes out in a piece of software, similar to like with Heartbleed, people were looking for vulnerabilities in OpenSSL at that point, trying to find additional vulnerabilities, additional ways in. In this case, you have researchers starting to look with that critical eye at this older code base, and using their new techniques, using their new understandings of how everything works. They're able to go find additional vulnerabilities, and I know there's a lot of people looking at Bash now, additional bugs coming out, additional vectors to get into boxes, and so it really offers not only researchers a place to jump off from, but then applying their new techniques and looking for bugs in different ways that they weren't looking for 20 years ago. It's just really interesting.
Yeah, another thing that's fascinating about this bug, as well as Heartbleed, was this whole marketing thing with this two-syllable catchy name that sort of gets a lot of attention to the vulnerability, and it's kind of interesting to think about whether or not that's going to continue. Like when something new comes out that's a 9 or 10 in severity, is it also going to need a name in order to be taken seriously? Just sort of a side question that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, just waiting for the logo at this point, huh?
Yeah, where's the logo out?
Yep.
All right, yeah. So, and I guess at this point, let's move on to what HP has done, from a product perspective to help our customers. I know you alluded to this a little bit, Steve, in your discussion. But can you talk a little bit about the IPS protection that you guys deployed pretty rapidly and how successful they've been?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll speak first about the tipping point perspective, because that's, of course, my team and the DB Labs research organization. So essentially, we have a small functional team that kind of keeps an eye on the threat landscape and monitors critical high-severity bugs and ones that either we care about or our customers or both. And, of course, Shellshock fell into that category. Immediately, as soon as we saw that, we had a conversation internally and knew that this was going to blow up really fast, and saw that the security community was starting to attach to it. So we actually developed what's called custom signatures, or CSWs, which is our rapid response for the field when it takes a little bit of time to actually QA, right, provide quality assurance for and test and deploy true mainline filters, which is our weekly filters. We actually want to have a quick and rapid and effective response for our customers. So we developed a tool called the Db Toolkit, which is actually something that can be consumed by customers and also developed in by customers. But we wrote a couple of custom filters within just a few hours of the public disclosure of the bug, and we shipped those out immediately. Now, the first vector that we decided to cover was the more ubiquitous one, which was HTTP, and we were seeing live attacks and live scans, within an hour or so of a public disclosure, and they'd probably been happening quite a bit earlier than that. So immediately we shipped out those custom signatures, our customers enabled them, and we saw some pretty quick telemetry showing the scans. And if you've been following this bug, you know that a couple of folks have erected websites that allow you to do these custom scans and can provide the Shellshock scan to see if you're vulnerable. So typically what it does is an echo or a pingback request where you actually leverage the bug, the exploit, to ping back to your machine. And this is the absolutely most deployed attack scenario, I guess you could call it. Even though it doesn't do anything truly malicious, it does tell you if you've been exploited. And we saw this blocking left and right within a few hours of those signatures. After that, we realized that, of course, we were going to want to do an out-of-line or emergency digital vaccine release. So we spent the next 8 or 10 hours just poring over research techniques, working with our zero-day initiative and our research teams to understand what were the different exploit vectors. We knew that HTTP, and we knew it pretty well how it would work, but we wanted to understand evasion techniques. We wanted to make sure these were as quality as possible and covered every different protocol. And so around, I think, 1 a.m., the night of, I guess the morning after, technically, of the release of Shellshock, we shipped our mainline digital vaccine package out of band in an abbreviated effort to provide coverage. And we actually added a couple of things. We somewhat replicated the HTTP type of filters, which we did as a custom filter, but we also expanded on those for evasion techniques and to utilize some of the really strong engine functionality that our product uses. So we continued to cover the HTTP versions, and we also went on to provide more generic coverage for just TCP and UDP attacks that we've demonstrated internally but haven't been seen much on the wire. I know that is really one of the differentiators between us and our competitors, is the fact that we shipped really quality, tight, false positive resistant filters right away, but also provided the scope and breadth of coverage so that other attacks that hadn't been demonstrated publicly yet could still be caught. And we've seen those be very effective so far. The last thing that I want to point out is we shipped what's called a hyper-aggressive filter or signature. And this is a signature that's designed to cover the absolute root cause of the vulnerability, regardless of whether the exploit filters or vulnerability filters are successful. Now, we have seen that they are, but in rare circumstances, there may be a time when something gets by. These hyper-aggressive filters can be enabled only really when it's under an attack, to stop the root cause of the vulnerability just in its most simple form. And there's about 4 or 5 characters in the attack that are just absolutely critical to stopping this, but are also highly false positive prone if you've been watching that. So we have been able to deploy that signature, and of course we've seen false positives as expected on that. Our recommendation was to not deploy that until it was tested. And we really haven't seen much in the way of a need for that. The vulnerability filters have been extremely, extremely effective in terms of blocking this. So that's, I think, a general recap of the approach. I think we shipped around 7 total filters, 3 for the different variants of HTTP attacks, a couple for UDP, a couple for TCP generically, and then that hyper-aggressive, more policy type of filter that I was talking about. And I think a little bit later today, or in this call, we're going to talk about the second exploit, the failed patch that came out for this vulnerability, and we also shipped a couple of filters for that in the mainline DB as well. So I'll stop hogging the screen and turn it back over to you.
All right, perfect, Steve. And let's move on to Joe. I know from the software security research standpoint, you folks updated. You guys produced an update over the weekend. For the Fortify group of products. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. We were actually able to squeeze in our update just before close of business on Friday. Okay. But we had essentially it's about any type of effective defense is about layers of security. And as Steve mentioned, he focused primarily on the HTTP aspect, or DV Labs did, for the digital vaccine solution, where we focused primarily on 2 areas. One was for protection, and the other is for detection. So with Application Defender, a new product that was just released within the last month, we actually have the ability to detect and block any of the commands that are coming in from an attacker that are looking specifically for vulnerable hosts inside your environment. And I guess kind of complementary to that, we also provide the means through HP Web Inspect to probe and look for vulnerable hosts within your environment to identify and prioritize remediation-based activities for those vulnerable hosts that you uncover. So within the 2, we focused, as Brian led off the discussion with, we focused on the CGI-related attack vector for remote command execution. And I think that's going to be probably the quickest hit area where this attack will be exploited, at least from a discovery perspective. And I think, too, as far as the impact is concerned, on top of the ubiquity is just the sheer creativity that an attacker has at their disposal to craft an attack can be so varied and so just devastating. I think that's one of the other big differentiators with this attack of Shellshock versus others historically. So yeah, that's what we've done from software security research, and we're continuing to monitor and look for other variants and add in other support as we see.
Perfect. And then Daniel from Fortify On Demand, any updates there?
Yeah, so we're happy to report that for the last couple of years at Fortify On Demand, our customers have been protected to a large degree by this because we've had our rules active, and our filters have included the detection of the remote or the command injection flaw, which basically spawns a process after receiving input. So for those who've been using the product for the last couple of years and remediating, they're already in pretty good shape. The other thing is we're basically in the process of doing dynamic discovery for all of our customers, and finding instances of this dynamically across their organization in their entire app portfolio. The focus there right now is definitely on the HTTP side, but we're going to expand that to the other types of daemons as well. And as has already been mentioned, it really is in lots of other locations, right? Any place where bash is processing input is really where the attack surface is. It's just that the main focus is on web because obviously it's most likely to be facing the internet. The other thing to talk about is in conjunction with the other HP research teams, we're doing the Fortify Open Review project, which looks for these types of vulnerabilities in popular open source projects. So that's definitely something to stay advised about. It's a really important project, and we hope to find more of these types of things before they come out in the future. Going back to what Steve and Joe were talking about, I've actually seen a ton of these attacks against various sites that I have control over, and seen all sorts of different vectors. So we've seen wget for a particular web location, which they're presumably logging, obviously, and ping, instead of going to a local host or something like that, a ping actually going to a location that they control, so that alerts, again, they can spawn alerts for successful vulnerable websites. But that's kind of a focus on what we're doing. We're basically trying to find this in our customers' websites and let them know that if they've been remediating with the particular vulnerability of command injection, then they're probably in pretty good shape already. And I'll go ahead and stop there.
All right, perfect. Thanks, folks, for those updates there. And before wrapping up, I just want to close, circle back to one of the points that I think Steve as well as Brian made, and kind of clinching back to some customer recommendations regarding patching and whatnot. So yeah, maybe let's just close off on that discussion, Brian, around as more folks are, obviously there's a lot of attention now on this utility here with Shellshock. And more issues are being found. So can you just elaborate a little bit more on that, and maybe just what customers should be doing as they hear from a patching perspective and things along those lines?
Sure. I think this is going to follow kind of the same trajectory that Heartbleed actually followed. Post the release of the Heartbleed vulnerability, even in the Zero Day Initiative, we were getting submissions in OpenSSL as researchers were putting that new eye, the more critical eye on that code base. And I think you're going to see that here with Bash. I mean, already we've seen several researchers actually find additional weaknesses in the Bash product itself that allow for remote code execution. But we're trying to, with the Zero Day Initiative, try to get researchers to submit some of those bugs to us so that we can disclose them properly, and they can make a little bit of money off of the vulnerabilities and the research that they're doing. I think, and some of the key things is that this isn't the only patch that's going to happen in Bash over the next several months as more people find vulnerabilities in it. So system administrators really should be prepared to deploy additional patches and defenses in the future weeks as these new vulnerabilities and these new vectors are discovered. And enterprise users should really immediately be watching these disclosures and patches as soon as the patch is available, and monitor their critical infrastructure with things like tipping point, so that they can actually get ahead of the attackers, make sure that they're secure and their environments are safe. And so I think Steve can probably speak to that. But as the months go on, you're going to probably see additional patches come out from Bash, and and enterprise users need to be aware of that so that they can prep their patching schedules, making sure that they're following the correct refeeds.
Perfect. All right. Well, hey, thanks, Brian. And I think I'll go ahead and wrap it up here. I know everyone here is kind of on the front lines here, so I'll let you get back to protecting our customers. And just one final point. There's a lot to talk about here, obviously, and we made references to product updates and new filters and whatnot. So at the end of this recording, you'll see some links to some helpful blog posts as well as any updated security bulletins that HP is going to be releasing. So once again, thanks a lot for attending, and we'll hear from you again soon. Thanks.